Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Love That Loves You Back, a podcast between myself, Valerie Kabov, and my dear friend Jonathan Fremantle. Uh, I'm an artistic miscreant, otherwise known as a self-described third-generation art professional, who's currently raising a fourth-generation art professional, uh, born in the depths of the Pale of Settlement in the former Soviet Union, and partly raised in Australia, uh, lived and worked in London and Paris, and 15 years ago, by a quirk of fate, relocated to Zimbabwe, where I'm the co-founder of First Floor Gallery Harare, trying to figure out life, education, art, and predominantly love of art as life goes on. And without further ado, over to Jonathan.
Thanks, Valerie. Yeah, Jonathan Fremantle. I grew up in Cape Town and studied in London. I did a long apprenticeship in fine art in the old sense, and have been more making art in one way or another ever since then. I live in Edinburgh now, but I also lived for a while in Johannesburg, where I had Hazard Gallery, and that was the context that I met Valerie about 10, 12 years ago, and just loved the conversation we had immediately about painting and how painting is everything. And that conversation's been a constant source of joy and sustenance over the years. So it does make sense that we share the conversation, and look forward to where this goes.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it usually goes anywhere and everywhere, but somehow we always come back to art, and
Yeah,
because it is the love that loves us back. Thank you very
right.
much for joining us, and we look forward to sharing the journey. Hey, Jonathan.
I,
Today we're having a silly discussion. I think in a way that it maps onto, as in a weird way, as a continuation of the Nepo kids
yeah.
conversation in a way, because I wanted to talk about this really unpleasant phenomenon of actors mainly entering into the fray as artists and getting museum shows and gallery shows willy-nilly. And I thought, well, when was the first time that I became aware of that? I think, or people from other fields, and I call this phenomenon of not just using your celebrity in one field to uh not just get a foot in the door, but get a way higher foot in the door than you deserve, right? In in the art world. And to me, this falls under the rubric of how hard can this art shit be, and I find that particularly annoying because it's and I think, and I'm not sure if other industries are as vilified. I suspect that fashion might also be in the same spot where you have a lot of musicians deciding to have their clothing line, and they probably say, how hard can this fashion shit be? But I think we're in this thing. Oh, I can sketch this.
There've been so many. The ones that really disturb me are it's when it's an actor or a musician whose work I love, and then you see their art pop up in a gallery, and it's so bad, and it makes you wonder why you even like their music or their films. The one that got me really in the guts recently was um, Bob Dylan, who's like undisputed genius and wordsmith and a kind of shapeshifter, and so everything he
Oh,
does,
wow.
you would assume would be measured in the same kind of equation, even if you may not like it, but you can see something intensely focused about it. And then I saw his kind of welded bits of kind of old farm implements in a gallery.
Oh,
As a musician, I'm not the only one who's respected, loved, etc. his work for so long. And everything he does, even though it doesn't always fit in the same parcel, has a kind of luminosity. It's brilliant. And it's not always polished. You know, sometimes there's an album he releases which is very raw, but you can still feel the kind of gristle of newness and brilliance about it. And then I saw there's a gallery called Castle Fine Art. I think what their thing is celebrities who become artists. So there's like a Billy Connolly print available section, and there's a Johnny Depp's. Really, we probably need to get on to Johnny Depp because his is the most offensive, I think.
it is.
There was Bob Dylan's sort of welded farm implements that kind of welded into sculptures, but they're kind of too good for outsider, but they're nowhere near good enough. I mean, if you're going to use his canon, his work as a kind of mirror into which we'll look at these steel objects, then they're awful, you know. But even on a level of a kind of entry into art, they've got a kind of aggressive ugliness about them that made me could really disturb me. And it's not for me to be disturbed. It's he can do whatever he wants, obviously. But it did make me wonder about whether he was okay.
Well, my concern is this: if you are really gifted in one field,
Yeah.
why does it blind you to the recognition of excellence in another, in
Right.
another
That's the
field? Or
point.
what gives you I mean, and again, I don't mind anyone using art as therapy. God knows, yeah, we're subjected to that nonsense, right? But please don't, what kind of temerity, and arrogance and vanity says that whatever I put out is good, and one thing that I'm actually very curious about, and I just did a tiny dive into it, like for instance, Mick Jagger went to art school, right?
Hmm.
And he hasn't put out any art,
Hmm.
right? And
Oh,
maybe it's because he went to art school. It's
yeah.
precisely the reason why he has the respect and he does,
But, but then you've got Ron Wood, who didn't
Mm.
go to art school, I don't think, or whether he did or didn't doesn't really matter. And he's another artist whose work you see a lot. And his paintings are a little bit like George Bush Jr., retired president paintings, which are kind of portraits of his fellow famous musicians done quite badly. Um, and, the only thing that makes them different is that they're a famous painting painted by a famous person, so famous person painted by a famous person. So I guess that's kind of that's the context, but the artworks themselves are like, ooh. Um, I mean, George Bush's
Well,
work
that's saying, so,
are so creepy that they're
oh
almost
no,
passable.
I think I was going to go to George Bush at some stage
Yeah.
precisely because he's kind of, in some way, genesis in my consciousness of
Hmm.
this nonsense movement. But there are I mean, it just seems that every day, ArtNet, as it's almost like the Daily Mail of the art world.
Sure.
It just has no artistic integrity whatsoever. The article that I shared with you, Pete Doherty, like first of all, I mean, the headline was brilliant, is that indie rock icon was Pete Doherty an indie rock icon in the first place, and he has a museum show. Then there was Sharon Stone, Basic Instinct, right? Iconic. She's genuinely an iconic actress and has an exhibition. And I mean, it seems like, well, obviously anyone in LA can have an exhibition because if they're in the industry, that seems, and then there's Jim Carrey, spends 5 years painting. And again, horrifying stuff. And we can go through what makes it particularly horrifying, that like in terms of Jim Carrey's oeuvre is that there is no stylistic consistency, and all of the features that make them excellent seem to fall out of the window when they start making art. And I think it's really important not to succumb to this celebrity culture. We have our own. I mean, one thing that I particularly enjoy about the art world is that we have our own celebrity statuses, right? So our our icon, our system of gods, right? Our
Mm.
pantheon is different to other
Yeah.
people's pantheon. And I enjoy the fact that we don't need to take on the pantheon of other industries, like if Beyonce started painting,
Mm.
uh, that would mean nothing to me. Like in my pantheon, Peter Doig is one of the gods and not Beyonce, and I think that's perfectly fine, uh, and that's why when other people cross over, they should do it the way we do it, the way we have to do it.
Sure,
It's
you start with a kind of private urgency and develop that work slowly and carefully until you know that it's coming from within, not just some kind of exorcism. I mean, there's other examples of the opposite. Someone like David Lynch, recently passed genius, who had consistently painted throughout his life and actually was painting when he started making films and kept the two running. And I don't love all of his paintings, but there's definitely a strong quality of what makes a visual artist in the work. So, I don't know whether there's a line to be drawn. It's not like no one can do it. It's just um, that kind of meteoric rise from starting painting. And then, a month later, we all have to accept that this work that's been made in a month or 2 months or whatever as a finished product. And it's really hard to justify the space that it occupies in quite, and it's not about who a members club who's allowed in and who isn't. It's that we are digesting this information, visual information, as a species, and there's only a certain amount of space, and there's a lot of great art, and well, not enough great art probably, and so so then we have these. I think you're right in saying that they're a kind of therapy works, and I don't
but
think
it's
they're bad.
pollution. But for us, it is pollution.
Yeah,
It's
that
noise.
that's it.
It's
Yeah,
it's
it is.
it's uh, it's noise, and it's about humility. And I think approaching, I mean, and we're in this field to serve, and I think it's a philosophical position, right? That you're in the service, and those sort of exercises are self-serving, right?
Yeah, that's
They're
it.
self and they're self-indulgent. And if it's self-indulgent, that's fine. When I self-indulge, I don't know what I do. I actually don't remember the
What do you
last time
do?
I self-indulged. Okay, this could be a subject for a whole other conversation. But let's listen, I'll take myself out to breakfast, something like that, whatever it is that
Mm.
passes for therapy. But I don't impose it on the public, right? I don't impose, and I think, and it's what really bothers me is the fact that the excellence or the precision that these artists would, expect of themselves
Yeah.
in the one field does not seem to translate to that level of
Mm.
exigence, right? In the field of art, because they can hold a paintbrush, and I'm like, no, that requires punishment and humiliation, like the rest of
Do
us.
you think that this is maybe a bit of a strong point, but do you think that if you've achieved a certain amount of excellence and respect and an audience in one area, you have a greater responsibility not to, um, because you have this channel where people accept what you're going to say as with a certain amount of authority, you have a kind of extra job, which is that you don't
Or you have a higher standard. Yeah, I mean, you probably do
Yeah.
because you have a high visibility on a platform, but it doesn't seem to
Mm,
bother them. But I have a feeling that it's potentially because with a certain level of celebrity in the sort of public eye, people are surrounded by yes people, people who
yeah,
will
sure.
say nice things to them, and they will, and they're used to, and also I have a feeling that, and you encounter people like that who everything they touch they seem to be able to do
Mm,
and there are and it is very difficult to be a multi-talented person, right? Because a lot of things come easily to them, so why not this? Except just because something comes easily doesn't mean that you have achieved, right? And those two things.
that's true.
And
I mean, we mustn't completely close the door because there is a kind of, I mean, we've got like Michelangelo as a good example, who designed staircases and did a fashion line for as we've discussed
the
previously,
Vatican.
for the Vatican. And then there's some more subtle examples, like someone like Nick Cave, who's a musician who we both love, and he's widely loved for his ability to grieve in a way, publicly, in a way that's helpful. His sort of shared grief is also transformational to the audience that love him and appreciate that ability to kind of be a space where grief is made, given the possibility to kind of
I
um,
mean,
grow.
Nick
And so he's got this blog where he talks to people called the Red Hand Files, and that's amazing. And that's a kind of artwork in its own. And then out of the hottest part of his grief, he started making these ceramic little figurines, which are very much connected to his own work. They're about the journey of the devil, and there's a theme that connects to his work. It's not, you can see where it's coming from. And they're beautiful. I mean, he straight away had a show at Xavier Hoofkins, and so then he wouldn't have if he wasn't Nick Cave, but then that's also permissible in a certain degree. Um,
But do we perceive then Nick Cave as an artist, as in like in a broader sense?
oh,
And this is just so in a way he's positioned himself as an artist who
yeah,
happens to, and one aspect of his practice is,
mm,
and in fact, he's positioned himself more as a poet,
yeah,
poet with a
mm,
music. And in that sense, you can even relate to the practice of, say, somebody like Leonard Cohen, right?
yeah,
Who, published poetry, and then music was one aspect of what
mm,
he did, and then if he by extension started, and there are some notebooks with drawings in them, and that is, and so insofar as something is integrated into
yeah,
your overall art practice and
mm,
connected, that then we have a way of reading it,
yeah,
right? And I think that makes sense. Although for me, it's kind of really ironic, and I think we've spoken to it before.
mm,
We've discussed it, that Nick Cave has a challenge because there's another Nick Cave, right?
yeah,
Who's also-
yeah. That's a big one.
yeah, it is a
It
big
is,
one.
and he also did have an exhibition with Brad Pitt and
Yeah,
Halsego. But I
yeah.
also kind of slightly defend that one because that show was a result of the three guys being in LA together, grieving on various different levels. And it was a sort of bromance that resulted in this quite disparate, strange show, but somehow holds up, but it's on the edge of holding up.
I mean, look, we don't need to apologize to them. I mean, on the good news side is that this too shall pass, and art history has a way of cleaning house in a
Yeah,
very tight,
sure. It remembers
tight.
what you did well and quite often
Yeah,
the other stuff. Yeah.
forgives a lot of people. So I think it is fine. It's just that in the present moment, it is very much a distraction, and it is a nuisance. I mean, there was another recent example where apparently Audrey Hepburn's granddaughter is having a solo exhibition, and
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and apparently the work is not that bad, and who cares? I mean, she
Mm.
goes under a different surname. It's a different industry. And then there was but unfortunately, the article writing about it said something like that she decided to remove herself into the Italian countryside for 10 years to dedicate herself to making art, and
Lucky
without
her.
missing a beat, there was a comment on the Instagram post as it because, of course, all of us have the privilege of removing
Yeah.
ourselves to the Italian countryside to dedicate ourselves to making art. And those are the breaks. I am concerned genuinely about the level, more about the pollution of art by celebrity culture. I mean, we've been dealing with it since I would like to say since the 90s. I think when because I think and maybe it predated it, but I think this is the first time that we saw, with the emergence of YBAs in the late
Yes.
90s, of artists becoming visible in the public eye in terms of
Mm.
the pages of newspapers, or kind of courting celebrity in a particular
Yeah.
way, right? And now we've sort of, and that has been kind of a downhill slide where artists emerged in the public eye, but then they started being subjected to the same pressures of the public eye. It was like having to be visible in terms of their practice, or literally exposing themselves. And I mean that in the most,
Mm.
in the most humiliating way
Yeah.
possible, rather than, just having to look a certain way, talk a certain way, present a certain way. And that actually has a debilitating effect on your practice as well, because um, you're desecrating a certain space. And also, you're not allowing artists to be ugly anymore, right? I mean, this is always a very private, this is the space where what you
Mm.
look like is entirely irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, remember in the 70s, even pop stars were allowed to be ugly. Now no one is allowed to be ugly. I mean,
I think that's a bigger problem than just celebrities, attractive celebrities making art. There's a kind of wave certainly on Instagram, and I probably imagine TikTok as well, which I didn't have TikTok, but um, the kind of phenomenon which we've touched on privately. I think you creating a bank of images which would lead towards an exhibition, but of people, scantily dressed men and women artists, posing in front of their artwork, and their kind of sexiness is that's the hook, that they're selling this artwork by. And it's I mean, it's fine, whatever, but it does definitely take away from the ability to look at the artwork.
yeah,
And part of what you're saying, this kind of buy me, buy me first, and then the work will be a sort of well, it's by me, so that's why you want to buy it.
well, exactly. I mean, and then there is a genre of that work, which is why, and I'm just going to go there, which is why Hitler's watercolors is still in the
Yeah,
market, right?
yeah.
But it's kind of an extreme form of celebrity-based collectible, right?
Uh-huh.
So which, and I think as a counterpoint to that, there was Sotheby's, or Christie's sale. There was a work by that was attributed to the Circle of Velasquez, and originally thought to be his self-portrait, then not authenticated as such, and a very, very fine portrait. It was in the recent New York sale, which of Master's works, which kind of, I guess, did poorly, but this was one of the works that sold for double the estimate. Still, it's an outstanding portrait. Uh, Sold for, I'd like to say, $96,000, have been on an estimate of 30 to 40,000, right? Still a ridiculously low figure for something that has survived more than 300 years, considering what fresh to market nonsense is still selling for, notwithstanding the correction in the market. And it sort of raised the question, and that particular work is an interesting example of work standing up for itself, right? And I think, and in that, and if you actually, and that was a really interesting sale. I mean, I went through it, and the works that did stand up for themselves, regardless of esoteric provenance or almost absence of provenance, in a sense, they still managed to sell because they're, and it was in a way heartening, right? That
Yeah.
a work a work can still stand up for itself and talk its own talk, uh,
Mm.
several centuries later. And that's what we kind of all want to achieve, is to make that kind of work that, does not depend on how scantily clad you are,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
brother you were, or,
Like, yeah. I have to share an experience which is sort of not on discussion, but I just came back from Athens. We were with the family there, and I'd been there when in my 20s. And you know how when you're young, you see these great works and they sort of go into you, but you're also looking at them. It's something about that part of your life when you're digesting masterpieces. You're so hungry, but you're also kind of in a way rejecting them because you've got your own journey somehow. Um, and going back to Delphi and being in this incredible place, I remember when I was 20 or 19, or whenever I was last there, I knew that it was one of the most special places I'd ever been to, and it stayed in that resonance for me all these years. And going back, it 100% stood up to that. And
that's
in fact, it it wasn't like coming home. It was like arriving at a place again for the first time, but knowing it. And so, we walked around and it was just miraculous, the feeling and the level of the fine frequency that that place existed on. And the masterpiece in Delphi is the Charioteer, which is this bronze sculpture discovered almost fully intact because of a earthquake which buried it. So it wasn't plundered, and it's probably one of the great, up there with the Pieta. It's miraculous. About 2 days before, we'd been at a rooftop bar in Athens in a sort of fancy hotel, and they had a replica of it in the lobby, like a pure replica in bronze. And I stood next to it and I felt my heart sink, like, oh God, maybe it's not as brilliant as I remembered. And as we got to Delphi and I was walking up through the museum towards the sculpture, dreading that it wouldn't meet this resonance that I'd connected to. And it's the opposite. It was like the most brilliant thing I've ever seen. It had such a quality. And it wasn't just the fineness of the carving and the elegance of execution, the sort of spiritual dimension in the way the body was understood, and it had an extra otherness. This work was brilliant. You could put it in any eon, in 500 years' time, or 5,000 years' time, or 5,000 years before, and it would 100% stand up in its original state and wipe the floor with anything that's in the room. It's
That's
so
amazing.
reassuring.
But I mean, the so I want to go to Delphi now, because I mean the only thing I know about Delphi apart from is the Oracle,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Oracle.
Where the oracle would breathe these gases, and then kings and warlords and or whatever's would come with their offerings and ask her for advice. And there was an incredible, I mean, kings from other kingdoms would come. It had such power, this place, and you can feel it.
Yeah, but that's what I think, is that certain places have power. We can sense it. We
Yeah.
we can't reduce it to
No,
concrete knowledge as
no,
yet. I think,
not yet. Yeah. Well, we feel,
I,
you know it. There's a part
mm,
of my body that was going, you know this. And
mm,
the mind was able to grasp at scraps and maybe contextualize, but really the essence of the knowledge, what I knew was happening, was beyond the kind of comprehension, but it was felt. Yeah.
yeah, it's it's our after all, we're only sort of machines made of flesh, you know,
On one
machines,
level, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is, yeah, I was also talking earlier today, this morning, about just wanting to become bionic as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
As I'll keep all of the neurons. Yeah, I'm keeping the neurons. But just give me replacement parts, not and the stomach. Just keep the
Yeah.
stomach, the eyes, and the brain. We're just like
Yeah.
good.
Spinal cord. The
Yeah,
the word that the Greeks had, this word arete, which meant when you do something so well, you become universal, you become God, as it were. And the charioteer is an expression of this moment where you do something with such grace and elegance that you transcend, the mortal coil.
yeah.
And perhaps that's kind of what we're talking about. It's like if you have the opportunity to transcend, don't weld farming equipment, or maybe just keep that out of the public eye. Maybe you need to do
Yeah,
that in order to
exactly.
keep on that note. I think that's the end.
You Now, on that note, we can, yeah, this is as good a this is as good a way to end the podcast.